Nosotha and Croeso. Welcome everybody to our last talk of this season, the 24-25 season. It's Easter, children on holiday from school, lots of families on holiday, and we have to pull out the woolly jumpers and the water bottles once again. So there we are, that's the weather. I want to first of all do the usual housekeeping stuff. So if we have to evacuate this room at all, if it's safe to, we go through that exit there. Otherwise, it's through the toilets here, down out onto the fire escape out there, okay? Could you please make sure you've muted or switched off all of your phones? Thank you. I want to welcome tonight Suryiah Evens, who's going to give us a talk on the museum in 25 objects. Suryiah is a heritage consultant, for the community and evaluation consultant, who works with lots of organisations across Wales, including Conwy Council, the National Park, Wildlife Trust and other councils and voluntary groups. She has been with the museum for the last 10 years. Gosh, really?
No.
That's why we're bedfellows nowadays. Coming to us after Conwy Council asked her to work with the trustees to find new premises, because we used to be in New York cottages, which was too small for the museum moving forward. And then she had to apply for funds to help us to refurbish it, and that she was very successful in getting those funds, hence the museum we have today. Her passion is researching social history. She's sort of Dennis Roberts' apprentice on pen history, and she's an apprentice in training. Tonight she'll be showcasing 25 objects, opening up the museum to us and some of the objects that we hold there. Suryiah, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sherry. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Can everybody hear me at the back? Great. We've got about 4,000 or so objects in the museum collection. So as you can imagine, choosing 25 was quite difficult. And I had to be careful not to go down the line of choosing 25 of my favourite things, because that perhaps doesn't reflect what everybody else would find interesting. What I tried to do was focus on Penmaenmawr's pivotal moments in Penmaenmawr's history, also items that link to wider societal changes as well, and perhaps that are representative of their time period. When this starts off, it looks like I'm going to go in a timeline, but I don't. And there's a reason for that, because some objects are sort of linked together, or the stories are linked together. So I pivot a little bit. And now I'm going to start off with the Neolithic axe head, and I'm sure that you're all very familiar with Penmaenmawr's Neolithic history. So we're stepping back here around 6,000 years in time. We've got a lot of axe heads in the museum. Most of them are rough outs, but recently we've been pretty lucky to receive 2 polished axe heads for the first time. One of them is very small and was found very locally near the beach. And the other one was found more near Henryd, which is a very nice polished axe. And that's the first time that we've had items like that donated, so it's quite special. Some of the extent of axe-making history in Penmaenmawr was discovered in the 1920s by Hazeldine Warren, and a series of excavations took place at that time. Since then, we've discovered that the axe-making landscape is far more extensive than we first believed. And for those of you that follow the museum or the Canneddau Landscape Partnership, you'll know that there's been lots of Neolithic axe digs over the last 5 years. This is the last year of that project. And they've found evidence of axe making in lots more places around the Carneddau landscape. So the landscape of axe making is quite extensive. The reason why I've chosen this is obviously because axe making has now become synonymous with Penmaenmawr, just like it has with Langdale. And Langdale has got group 6 axes, and our stone is called group 7 axes. And this map, which is very small on the screen here, shows the extent of where group 7 axes have been found around Britain. So they were obviously being exchanged with other peoples during the Neolithic period. They were probably being exchanged in their rough out form or polished elsewhere. And that's quite interesting because we're not sure why that happened or where it happened. It could have been near Penmaenmawr, it could have been quite far away that things were polished. So what that tells us is that Penmaenmawr was connected to lots of different people and lots of different landscapes right across the country 6,000 years ago. Now, when Hazeldean Warren did the digs in the 1920s, Penmaenmawr was already established on the map for archaeology because obviously people walking the landscape during the 19th century, they were very aware of the stone circles, etc., that were around them and wrote extensively about that. But what Hazeldean Warren's discoveries did was throw Penmaenmawr's history far further back by a few thousand years and sort of highlighted how connected the landscape was even before the Bronze Age. I keep on forgetting to use this. I want to go to my screen all the time. I'll probably just do that. So talking about the Bronze Age, the second item that I've selected here is a Bronze Age urn, and many of you who have been to the museum have probably seen this urn on the top of the cabinet in pride of place there. It was discovered in 1889 when Colonel Derbyshire was making a new tramway between the crushing mill and the railway, and they were digging out a track and they found this urn. And what they realised is that well, they found a series of urns. What they realised is that they'd accidentally cut right through a burial mound or a barrow. Altogether, they found 6 urns and 5 separate burials, so the charcoal and all the burnt areas without urns over them, which is quite unusual. All of the urns were face down on cremated remains. So the cremated remains weren't in them, they were and then the urns were turned upside down over the cremated remains. All of them were on a bed of stone, so like a slab of stone to keep them solid. And then when the earth was put over them, that would have helped sort of keep the urns in place. A series of mid-sized stones were found as well in a strange shape, and they were all stood upright around this barrow. At first, people thought, oh, there's going to be something right in the middle of this strange shape, perhaps another burial, but there was absolutely nothing in there. So it was just the urns that were found and these cremated areas around. Now, what this urn did, of course, was inspire a whole series of Goss china. Some of you might have collected or do collect Goss china, which are small ceramic items, and they have the crests of different towns on them. And they were often inspired by archaeology of the day. So quite famously, you'll find lots of these little urns if you go on eBay. There's lots and lots of this china, and the urn is fashioned after the urn that was found in Penmaenmawr. And you'll see a model of ancient urn found on Penmaenmawr printed on the bottom of all of these things. So what happened to the urns? Well, some of them weren't in very good condition. They were in bits when they were found, and some of them were complete, and they were taken to Grosvenor Museum in Chester. So we're talking 1889, quite a long time ago. When we collected these urns a few years ago, well, the urn a few years ago, they were hoping to give us all of them. And when they opened the drawers, you can imagine how many items are in Grosvenor Museum in Chester. They don't look at these things every day. When they opened the drawers, they found that most of them were in crumbs. So unfortunately, they deteriorated to the extent that it wasn't worth us having them. But this one was intact. And I had to put this in my car with other small ceramic items and clay items from Grosvenor, and they had people to sort of carry everything out and put it in the back of my car. I have never driven so slowly from Chester in all my hands were gripping the steering wheel to the extent that I had white finger, because I thought that everybody was going to potentially crash into me and sort of crash into this precious urn. It hadn't been back in Penmaenmawr since the day it was dug up 120 years ago, and I didn't want to be the one to ruin it. And so I drove home. I live an hour away in Llanfihangel. I drove home because it was very late by the time I got from Chester. And then I made up my mind to set off at 5 o'clock in the morning to the museum when nobody else would be on the roads, so that nobody would crash into me on the way. And again, I was driving about 25 miles an hour. I was so glad when I got it into the museum and just sort of handed it over and got it into the cabinet. A nerve-wracking moment. This relates to the next item, which is a Neolithic stone cup, item number 3. So, the urns that were found in Penmaenmawr a few weeks later, they were turned out because they were full of earth and sort of debris from being underground for thousands and thousands of years. So they were turned out in Chester Museum. In 2 of them, some bronze pins were found, and we've got those in the cabinet again in the museum. We don't know the significance of that, but 1 pin was found in each of 2 urns. And then in another, this Neolithic stone cup was found. So imagine that you've got a Bronze Age urn with a Neolithic cup inside it. So this cup must have been very precious to somebody who was either associated with the person who was deceased, or perhaps to the person themselves. They think that it was made by cutting the end of a stone and scooping out the inside. So sort of cutting the end of a stone, a rounded stone off, perhaps from the beach, smoothing it off and then smoothing down the inside. And as you can see, it's amazingly precise. If you feel the item, it's lovely and smooth. Somebody who has worked on this for many, many hours to get it to be like that. This vessel is only about this large. And again, it's on display in the cabinet in the museum. Archaeologists were so excited about it at the time, because they'd never seen anything like it, that it went on display and it was exhibited in the Society of Antiquities in London. Archaeologists are still excited about it. Lots of them come and sort of tell us, and I don't know if any of you know Jane Kenny, but this is something that's not seen. It's a very unusual item, and we don't know what it was used for. We think it might have been a vessel for drinking or some sort of ceremonial cup. We're not too sure. But it's a very, very unique item, and probably the only one in Britain that has been found. So we're very lucky to have it. Again, a familiar one from our cabinet, the stone mould. This sandstone mould was found at Brychadinas, so the Lost Hill Fort in 1910. The hill fort was obviously quarried away. It was recorded by Besant Lowe in 1920, and he described it as a quernstone, so as something to grind corn, flour, etc. Then it completely disappeared from record. Apparently, it was stored in the quarry office for about 50 years, and then they decided that they needed to have a bit of a clear out, and sold a load of stuff to an antique dealer in Llanfihangel. So a guy called Brian Bradshaw came along. He owned Half Hall in Bolton, and he purchased it. And there it stayed. Apparently it was used as a doorstop for many years, until 1982 he donated it to the museum in Bangor. What it is a bit of a mystery. So it could be a quernstone, but the trouble is, if you look at the sides of it, it's very shallow. And so I've tried sort of putting a little bit of grain in it ages and ages ago, and it easily flicks out of the side, so you wouldn't be able to grind much in that. And this looks like a spout, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was part of something bigger at one time. The other thing it could be is the bottom of a cheese press. But again, a little bit shallow, wouldn't really steady the press enough, and a lot of liquid would probably come over the sides. I spoke to Dr. Frances Lynch, and she thought it could be an ingot mould, so a mould to make some sort of metal sheet plate that was used as currency back in the day, and certainly there are examples that have been found in Scotland, very similar, carved out of bigger flat stones. I should say as well that this is very flat at the bottom. And the other thing it could be is a mirror mould. Now, there's only a couple of mirror moulds been found across Britain. There's only a couple of Iron Age mirrors that have been found across Britain as well, and Bronze Age ones. Very few complete ones. And it could have been that there was more of the stone at the bottom and it had a more solid handle. So you see some, like the mirrors you would buy today, with a sort of more solid oval handle at the bottom. We don't know what it was for. We could get the bottom tested to see what it was used for. Perhaps there's some traces of grain or cheese or something like that that's in the bottom. It would cost a lot of money, but I'm hoping that one day there'll be a grant available and we can do that. Although part of the fun is not being able to solve the mystery and have lots of people having different opinions on it as well. So it is whatever it is to you, I suppose. This one really excites me. It's Emma Cram's guidebook. So Emma Cram lived in what we now know as Plas Gwyn. It was Penmaenmawr at the time, with her husband, a retired teacher in the 1800s. Now we're talking the early 1800s here, 1850s. She was the author of this book, and it's the first guidebook known to be written about Penmaenmawr. And it was published in the 1850s by a publisher in Caernarfon. Emma was a talented writer and artist, and you can see some of her illustrations in the book there. She drew mainly Hirion and lots of other places of interest. I'm not sure how many books she did author in her time, but she certainly wrote one about the Isle of Man, which was published by a publisher there. Obviously, many of you would have seen old Penmaenmawr guidebooks over the years, and she paved the way, really, for lots of guidebooks that were published right from the 1880s, really up to the 1980s. That's when they sort of started to slow down a little bit, and printing got more expensive, I suppose. And then, obviously, the internet took over, and we don't get these types of guidebooks anymore. But I think it's quite a special thing that the first guidebook in Penmaenmawr was authored by a woman. The next item is Mary Howitt Letter. Mary was a 19th century author, and many of you will recognise her poem, The Spider and the Fly. Some of you might have done it in school. I was searching for some diaries that were written by people who had come to Penmaenmawr. I use a couple of online sites that are free and sort of trawl them and try and find different writings about Penmaenmawr. And I came across a book of Mary's letters that were written by her daughter. And in those letters, she kept on mentioning Penmaenmawr. I researched her a bit more and realised that she used to come and stay here quite often, but also she was friends with Esther Lloyd-Jones, who lived in the Bryn Mawr estate. In her letter, she was asking Esther a lot of questions about Welsh culture, and then, about 5 or 6 letters on, she mentioned a book that she was writing about Penmaenmawr. That book became a family saga over a series of 3 books. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, obviously, it's fiction, but I think it is based on true stories because there's lots of events that correspond to what was happening in Penmaenmawr at the time that are in this book. There's a lot of scandal, and it's quite absorbing reading. It's very religious, as you can imagine. You know, at the time, Mary was a Catholic author, and so she was fascinated by Welsh chapel culture. And there's one of the books, I think it's number 3, has about 60 pages of a sermon in it. I sort of like skipped to the end of that, but she was absolutely fascinated by what happened in the chapels and the different practices that people had. I learnt a lot from reading these books. They're all available free online. And there were different fascinations with certain objects in the home, the coffer being one of them. Practically every 10 pages, she mentioned somebody's coffer and what they had in it, you know, if they were storing blankets, how they locked it, etc. So obviously that was a big topic of conversation in the day, and she learnt that from Esther Lloyd-Jones. I'd be fascinated to find out whether some of the families, you know, found out about these books that they were based on, and if they recognised themselves in these stories. But Mary obviously loved Penmaenmawr, and she wrote a lovely poem about the quarrymen. And if you visited the museum or come in, you'll see that poem is in the corner of the museum down the wall. And it was a tribute to the quarrymen and their hard work. So she was quite a woman and sort of left us with quite a good legacy, really. But do look up the books if you can find them online. Cost of Caer Gwyn, they're called. The next item is cinder goggles. These were, when I first got to the museum, I was told that these were goggles used by children in the quarry. To be honest, that didn't ring quite right to me, because the quarry weren't known for giving people PPE and worrying about their safety, frankly. So I did a little bit of research, and cinder goggles, they're called, and they were mass-produced with the growth of the railway network. So initially, only railway workers wore them, but of course, a lot of the carriages, you can see here sort of, we call it cattle class now, don't we? You know, like third class on aeroplanes, and but people would sit in amongst the animals on sort of hard benches. The carriages in third class were completely open, and they were practically next to the engine at the front. So all of the cinders would fly backwards, and they would go into people's eyes. Apparently, some people were even set on fire. Their clothing was set on fire with the cinders because they were travelling in the third class carriage. So people started wearing cinder goggles to stop the cinders going into their eyes when they were travelling in carriages without windows or that were completely open to the elements. They actually became a bit fashionable then, and people started to put blue glass in them because they thought that they were cool, and also that blue glass had magical powers to heal eyes. And of course, nowadays, I'm sure you all go to steampunk festivals, but you'll see people with similar types of goggles on. And if you like Harry Potter, then Professor Moody wore steampunk glasses, which are based on cinder goggles on his motorbike as well. So you'll still see them today. And I actually bought a pair quite recently, not to wear myself to go to a steampunk festival, but to compare them, for children to be able to compare them in handling boxes. So yeah, it's quite an interesting little item. Save your eyes. Next item is one of my favourites. This one isn't one that you would have seen. So it's a watercolour book. I saw this on sale in America on Abe Books. If I've got a report to write, you can guarantee I'm on eBay or Abe Books because I'm procrastinating and thinking of something better to do and looking through those instead. And by chance, I came across this book of 90 watercolours by a lady called Catherine Sarah Morris. She visited Penmaenmawr and Dwygyfylchi in 1886 and painted lots of buildings and landscape scenes. She was actually from Liverpool in a place called Beechwood, and her book contains paintings of all of the houses that she lived in throughout her life, plus places that she found special when she went and visited different areas. Her husband was John Grant Morris of Liverpool. If you go to Liverpool, you'll see plaques with his name on in quite a lot of places. His father was the mayor of Liverpool in 1844, and he commissioned Waterhouse to build Allerton Priory for him. So he got quite a good connection. What's really strange about this, though, is he built hospitals, and his name is like splashed on lots of government papers during the day. But we haven't been able to find portraits of him or his son or Sarah. Catherine, sorry, and it's really strange. So we have to do a little bit more digging and try and find something that we can, because we'd like to do an exhibition of these paintings, and obviously to put faces to the paintings as well would be really good. So that's something that we're still pursuing and still researching. What is amazing about this book is that it's captured images of buildings that are no longer up in Penmaenmawr, and so it's sort of captured a moment in time really in the 1880s, which is absolutely amazing to have that record. The next item is Harrison's medicine bottle. Again, we've got a very good collection of medicine bottles in the museum from the different chemists that were in Penmaenmawr from around the middle of the 1800s right up to about 1960s, and they all had beautifully embossed bottles, or Harrison had a labelled bottle. This is the only one with liquid still inside it that we've got. We don't know what's in it, and I'm not going to open it. I'm going to leave it well alone. Harrison's is still a bit of a mystery to me. If you look at old photographs of Penmaenmawr at the High Street, so it was the chemist sort of opposite the spa, you'll see in the 1880s, 1870s, a Harrison's. Then people say to me, oh yes, I remember Harrison's. And so I'm still a little bit confused about whether it's the same family that owned the chemist over many years and sort of kept on having children that became chemists. I have been told that they were different families, but different families called Harrison who had chemists, I'm not too sure about. So again, I need to do a little bit more research on that. Obviously, the lack of public health service at the time meant that many people turned to chemists for tonics. There was a famous Penmaenmawr tonic, which was a cure-all. Some of you would have heard of Suryiah Evens oil, which back in the day, again, those sort of cure-alls were very popular. Perhaps this is a cure-all, we're not too sure. Those who couldn't afford it obviously turned to alternatives. So we've got the quackery coming into it then, and people, producing all sorts of weird rituals and cures that was a fraction of the price of the doctor, but obviously also a fraction of the effectiveness as well. I've looked through all of the prescription books in Penmaenmawr from this period. So we're talking like 1880s, 1870s. And Harrison's was definitely the drug supplier to the gentry. So you've got all the big names in these prescription books. And obviously you've got your usual chloroform, etc., being prescribed for various different things. But you've also got laudanum and various painkillers. The other chemists down the road tended to supply the more regular things on prescription. So I think Harrison was possibly great at sort of sourcing drugs and mixing them, etc. But prescription books are full of people who, the great and the good, as it were, sort of go in and getting what they needed from them. Next one's a school photo. I've tried not to pick many photos in this, but this one really speaks to me because we've got, again, thousands of school photographs in the museum. When you look closely, sometimes you see the children looking quite dour in the photographs and quite sad. But Penmaenmawr is always, the narrative for years has been, that it's quite wealthy and wealthy people came here to live, and their stories have dominated the narrative for many years. But when you zoom in to some of these photographs of the school children, you see the absolute poverty. I mean, this is what they would have called a ragged child. And lots of the photographs have sort of torn shoes, torn dresses, etc. You'll also see some very raggedy looking clothes, but beautiful collars. And obviously they were loaned those collars to make themselves look more presentable during the photographs. So it's a photo that sort of stuck with me, and we've got a couple of photos of that little girl. And it doesn't change much over the years. That the clothes are still sort of hand-me-down, and even the girl next to her looks like she's wearing some sort of sacking over her just to keep her warm. So Penmaenmawr has many stories, and obviously some of it is that abject poverty that isn't talked about as much as perhaps the wealthy that came here. The next one is a needlework sampler book. This one, sorry, I'm just confused myself with my papers. This one is quite unusual because it's actually from Ireland. You'll see the National Model Female School. So the poor people, there were areas of mass poverty in Ireland during the late 1800s, and girls in rural schools were put into National Model Female Schools as pupil teachers. So they were young girls who were sort of showing some promise in order to learn these domestic skills so that they could teach other girls in rural schools. They were sent out to teach these girls these needlework skills. So this was some sort of demonstration book, I suppose, showing the skills of the pupil teacher and the intricate needlework that she undertook, and all the different stitches she learned and things like that. It's absolutely amazing. We've had it conserved recently. Sorry, I thought I had another page of it then. Which, you know, hopefully we'll keep it for another couple of 100 years. Even though it's from Ireland, what it's doing here, we're not too sure. I think that it was found somewhere like Ysgol Pencae, and perhaps one of the pupil teachers or one of the teachers brought it with them, and as again, sort of like your portfolio and an example of your work. But it's quite precious. These are very rare. You can imagine that this type of material over the years deteriorates, and not much of it can be saved. You know, that's the way material is. So the fact that this is in such great condition and that it's had some conservation work to it as well is absolutely amazing. And it's something that we would like to do more about in terms of an exhibition in the future, perhaps with other fabrics. One of the things that struck me when you think about Ysgol Pencae at the time, in the late 1800s, is that the girls did learn needlework, but often the materials couldn't be afforded. So the school would send letters to Mrs. Derbyshire and a couple of the other gentry in the community, and they would ask them whether they would kindly donate some materials for the girls to continue their education. Sometimes the classes were called off completely. The girls were told not to bother coming in because there were no materials for them to sew or to do any work. So the boys could have their classes, but the girls couldn't because there was just no materials and they couldn't afford it. So again, it shows that sort of inequality of education at the time. The quarry tallies. Again, we've got a great collection of quarry tallies. After filling a wagon with the completed sets, the set maker would hook a tally onto the wagon before it was weighed. They were paid by the weight. The tally was imprinted with the set maker's unique identification number so that the weighman knew that it was that set maker that had made that many sets, and obviously they were paid by that. I feel the tallies sort of tell lots of hidden stories. Set makers were well paid. We know that compared to other workers in the quarry. However, the pressure's on, isn't it? So if you're a well-paid set maker and you've sort of perhaps climbed the social ladder and perhaps your wife is running a boarding house that you've taken out a mortgage to buy, you've got to keep up that work. Now, I don't know if you've seen the photographs of set makers working, but they were all bent over. They used to work making sets standing. In Langdale, when they were making sets there, they would sit down. So you can always tell the difference between a Penmaenmawr photograph and a Langdale photograph. And I've heard stories that over the years, you know, sort of older set makers, you'd see them walking through the town with sort of bent over backs, which the same thing happens to blacksmiths over the years. So the pressure would have been really on. And if you're a set maker and you go up to the quarry for the day, and you need to fill that wagon and fill as many as you can, and perhaps you're just not feeling your best, But you've got a mortgage to pay, and you've got to keep going, and you've got your family to look after. And I just think that these tallies, that we've got so many different numbers, and the quarries change as well. So the names of the quarries, so you can see different tallies to the right there. They just tell so many different individual stories, and it's a project I'd love to do later on, because I think that lots of families know what their grandfather's tally number was, or still have a record of that, and I'd love to sort of record some of those stories and relate them to the tally numbers. The district nursing donation box. When I first came to the museum, this was used as a normal donation box. Obviously, before the establishment of the NHS in 1948, district nursing associations were developed to employ district nurses to provide healthcare in the communities. This was actually founded by William Rathbone. So William Rathbone was a Liverpool MP. His family made their money from the slave trade. When his wife was very ill, he employed a nurse to look after her. His wife unfortunately died, and so he had this nurse on a 3-month contract and wasn't sure what to do with her. So he said, go out and just look after the welfare of people in the poorest districts of Liverpool. So that's what she did, and apparently the impact was amazing. So the maternity health improved, babies' survival rates improved, and generally people's well-being, sort of knowing that they had access to healthcare at that time, had a huge impact on the community. As a result of that, William campaigned for the District Nursing Association to be rolled out across the country. It was paid for basically like private healthcare by donations from the gentry, but also from individuals as well. They pay a couple of shillings every week towards their healthcare needs. Something went wrong in Penmaenmawr. The District Nursing Association fell out with the local UDC at the time, and there were huge rows that started playing out in the newspapers, sort of one party having a go at the other. And it lasted about 10 years. And I don't know what it was. I think that they didn't like certain members of the UDC, and then the UDC thought that the District Nursing Association was old-fashioned and needed to modernise, and so never the twain shall meet. However, the District Nursing Association kept going right through World War I, and it wasn't until the NHS started, then in 1948, that the last district nurse in Penmaenmawr was actually paid for by subscriptions. And that nurse apparently kept going and working until the 1960s in Penmaenmawr, but obviously by then she was being paid by the NHS. So that little box tells its story as well. We've got a Band of Hope banner here. And I'm sorry about the photograph on the left, but I couldn't find the right banner to, to photograph it properly, but you can see it being used on the right-hand side. The Band of Hope was a Victorian temperance movement which focused on educating children about the dangers of alcohol and promoting abstinence. It involved both the churches and chapels, so it crossed both denominations, really, and the chapel movement in particular were very keen on taking it up because obviously they were sort of more strict about the use of alcohol. In the 19th century, there was a big problem with drunkenness in industrialised areas, and Penmaenmawr was no exception to that. There's lots of court cases, lots of people being arrested in the newspapers. Obviously, as a result of that drunkenness, women experienced violence in the home, and there was also a lot of frustrations about very short resources in the home being spent on the demon drink. And so it caused lots and lots of problems. So it's understandable why many women in particular took to this cause. Sometimes in the photographs, you know, men were involved as well, and often their husbands would come along, or they strongly believed in it. There's a story in Cerrig-y-Drudion that the Band of Hope there, the temperance movement, the women would go to a cafe, and the pub was sort of just past the cafe, and apparently the men created a path around the back of the cafe where there was no windows and they couldn't see them go into the pub. But I think the reason why I've chosen this banner is that it sort of symbolises a bit of a different time when women did have less agency, and they were banding together in these organisations that gave them a lot of support for each other, and also a whole social structure around the community. And, you know, as we know, chapel, sometimes people would go 4 times a day to chapel, and their whole weekends would be filled, particularly a Sunday would be filled with lots of chapel activities, and it was a whole social and cultural and educational way of being. And so we've got quite a few of the Band of Hope banners, and I think they sort of symbolise that these people want life to be a little bit better for them, and bandying together in order to do that. Got a Quarryman's Bible here. Again, this has been for conservation recently. And what's interesting about this is that apparently it was used in the quarry at lunchtimes, and the quarrymen contributed to the cost to purchasing the Bible collectively. So they all bought it together, and then during the lunchtimes or their break times, they would read pieces of scripture to each other. Now, I think part of that as well, because there was a massive desire at the time to become educated, and there were mutual improvement societies, evening classes in Penmaenmawr. We've got lots of posters of like science classes, literature classes, history classes that were all available for the quarry workers and other people to go, and they would be full. You know, these classes were really well attended in the community. So there's a list at the front there of people who probably collectively subscribed or joined a group of people who would sit around, and it's all different years, you can see there, where people's names are noted and who contributed to sort of this group effort to learn more about scripture and worship, but also probably to be educated together while they were in work and having their downtime. I've got a Pendyffryn estate book. The reason why I've chosen this is quite a simple item, because it's like a sale book that has lots of photographs of the Pendyffryn estate in it. But the reason why I've chosen it is because I think Pendyffryn's transitions over the years have really impacted the community. So first of all, the big news is the Derbyshires move in, and obviously they were the quarry owners, and they had a huge impact on the social and cultural life of the town and employment in the town. And then when it was sold, it became a Nordrac in Wales sanatorium, which is a TB sanatorium. And it came about because George Morton Wilson, a doctor, had contracted TB and went to a Nordrac sanatorium to get better in Switzerland. He was so inspired by his experiences there that he wanted to set up a sanatorium of his own. And he chose Pendyffryn as the ideal place for that. And you can see the huts outside, because obviously the whole thing was to have fresh air and to get air into your lungs. And in some of the photographs, you'll see nurses that wheeled the beds outside of people who were really ill to get sort of fresh air into their lungs. What's amazing about the sanatorium at that time is that it has some really pioneering scientists in it. So there was one scientist who was doing lots of experiments with a pneumothorax machine and writing about that breathing apparatus and helping people to breathe by sort of there's various needles in the lungs and things like that, that were really pioneering work and sort of helped to pave the way for further respiratory mechanical devices that were used to help people breathe over time. Unfortunately, George contracted TB again and passed away, and he's buried in Dwygyfylchi. But another thing that's fascinating about the Morton Wilsons is that his daughter, Afra, she joined the army for a while and became a bike messenger on the front line. But then she became a scientist, and she specialised in soil science. She was instrumental in setting up like an environmental part of a university to try growing plants for medicinal purposes and doing testing on them for Boots the Chemist. And then she became one of the first female directors of Boots the Chemist, and sort of managed that for many years along with her research project. So she was quite an influential woman and did an amazing job. And then, of course, Pendyffryn became what we know it as now. I mean, obviously with different owners, but more of a holiday park and caravan site. And it has an impact on Penmaenmawr now in that we have visitors from the caravan site who come here very regularly, and they visit the museum and they add to our economy, and it's now part of that whole visitor landscape in Penmaenmawr. So it's gone through many transitions that have been pretty influential, both to the town, but also sort of with science as well. I chose this one, a very simple one, because obviously the museum is based in the old post office, and I felt that we needed to reflect that somehow. And I love seeing postmarks with the old slogan of Penmaenmawr twixt mountain and sea, which was first pioneered by the Unitary District Council, which is like your town council, in the 1920s, and became a sort of firm slogan for many years. Recently, we've been using it on some of our products in the museum, so we make bags and mugs and things like that, and we've brought this slogan back and are using it on various things. But I just wanted to sort of pay a nod, really, to that post office history, because that building was so important. People fought for many years to get a post office in Penmaenmawr, about 30, 40 years altogether. And then it finally opened around 1907 to not a lot of fanfare. I'm saying around 1907 because I can't find any evidence of an opening ceremony. But we've got some lovely photographs of the staff and a few sort of post office items, including the demolishing of the old sorting office as well that was at the back. So yeah, it's just to sort of pay a nod and respect to the building and that history. Quarryman's Notebook. This quirky notebook belonged to Robert William Roberts of Coitmore. He was a blocker in the quarry and a secretary of the local chapel Eisteddfod. It's only this big, this book, and it's absolutely fascinating. It was brought in by his granddaughter, who thought that it should be saved, obviously, and part of the museum's collection. And he was such a cultural man. He was the secretary of the local Eisteddfod, and he used to record and draw little ditties, jokes. Obviously, he was, I don't know what that says in Japanese. Hopefully it's not swearing. But musical things as well, sometimes, never always. The lost chord and a piece of chord in it is just very sort of, probably a bit like an alternative comedian now. And then doing a little, asking people to contribute as well. So, you know, Richard Jones of David Street, Penmaenmawr, he was obviously asked to write that poem and perhaps do that drawing in the book. And it's absolutely full of all of these different little quirks that I thought were quite special. And if you've got a chance, I suppose it's a bit like journaling now, you know, the trend for journaling, that people are putting stickers in their journals or sort of doing little drawings and things like that. And I guess it was his journal, his version of a journal back in the day. So I urge you all, if you've got a chance to do that and carry a notebook around with you, do, because 100 or so years later, we find it absolutely fascinating that somebody's done that. role of honour, we've got a few roles of honour. And obviously with the gradual loss of the chapels in Penmaenmawr and their conversion to private dwellings, we're very fortunate that the members of the chapel have decided to bring the rolls of honour to the museum so that we can preserve the names of those who died in both world wars in Penmaenmawr. And we've got two of them, two of the large ones up on the wall from local chapels. But it's important that we make sure that those names are recorded and saved, and so that's why I've chosen this as one of the key elements, because in the First World War, Penmaenmawr lost over 60 men, and in the Second World War, Penmaenmawr lost over 30 men. Now, you know, it's a small community, and particularly then, okay, you might have had a population of a few thousand people, but to lose 60 men in the space of quite a short space of time, then that would have had a huge impact. You know, some of these families lost 4 children in the war, so it had a massive impact on the community, and so I felt it was very important to include it in this list of objects. Likewise, I was talking to one of our trustees about, I was a bit concerned that I wasn't able to find or locate, or nobody had come forward with anything representing women in the army. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, these came in, which was absolutely amazing. And Olwen, to whom they belonged, loads of photographs of her working the land with others accompanied this collection. Obviously her Land Army badge and the release certificate as well. And it's an important reminder to us that lots of people contributed to the war effort. We need more of this stuff in the museum's collection, so if any of you know of anything or know of people that have got these types of items that are representing women in war, then please ask them to come and donate them and tell their stories as well, because we need to get them recorded and have more representation of that in the museum. The next item, object 21, you'll be glad to hear, is Rojak design drafts. I haven't chosen the Rojak dolls, which might be a surprise to you, but that's because I feel that these design drafts are just so intricate and so amazing. The company was founded by George Rogers and John Clark. What was amazing about it is it had a huge impact on female employment in the town. I'm not saying they were well paid, and apparently some of the conditions were not great. People talk about the smell of glue in the houses, and it absolutely stank and would linger on clothes and furniture for ages and probably was not good for you at all. However, it did give women agency. So those who perhaps couldn't go out to work because of family commitments or found that difficult were able to make dolls at home. And it sort of brought that type of accessibility of employment a little bit closer. So, you know, there's something to be said for that. And we have got the most amazing collection of Rojak designs in the museum. Lots and lots of even box designs, nail file designs, etc. So apart from us having, yes, a huge collection of dolls, but we've got many, many design drafts, printer plates, etc. We are going to do an exhibition on it over the next couple of years, but it's going to need some special cabinetry because, you know, the dolls have all got sort of fabric clothing on, etc. And we need to control the light levels when we exhibit things like that. So we need to apply for a grant to get some special cabinetry to make sure that all of those things are protected when they go on display. But yeah, we're lucky to have that amazing collection of all these design drafts that are sort of iconic to Wales, and again that's why I chose it, because apart from it being a pivotal thing in Penmaenmawr's history, this iconography of Wales went everywhere, and they also produced things for the Isle of Man, for Cornwall, etc. So their designs were sort of formed lots of parts of people's souvenirs and memories wherever they went in the country. And yeah, it's an important role that they played. The Doctor's Bell. We selected this item because of its place in nostalgic memory, really, of the residents of Penmaenmawr. So many people comment about the fact that they remember the bell in the doctor's office and they remember waiting for it to turn different colour so that they knew that they would be next and go in when they went to visit Dr. Wyn Jones. This also has a bit of a legacy aspect in relation to Dr. Wyn Jones because he set up an education fund to support girls and boys who wanted to pursue further education, support them financially with a few £100s to get equipment, etc. That grant ran for many years, and I'm sure that it helped many young people in Penmaenmawr. It actually only finished probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I think, and we've got some of the papers from that. So it's a lovely nostalgic item that people remember fondly, and unfortunately, it doesn't work anymore, but it's up on the wall on the first floor of the gallery. The next item, 23, is Ivor Davies's notebook. So for those of you who don't know, Ivor Davies was like the original historian in Penmaenmawr. He was born in the 1800s and died, was he 104, Mafam? We always forget this. Was he 104 when he died, Ivor Davies? Yeah, so he lived a very long time. Ivor recorded everything. He recorded everything in tiny writing, in notebooks, on scraps of paper, because apparently he was quite tight-fisted and didn't like to buy paper. So he would record on the backs of things. And you can see he meticulously indexed everything. And he was incredibly nosy. There are things in this book that I wouldn't dare ask people, like, how much did you pay for your horse? I'll write that down. It's just bizarre. I mean, it's fascinating. But how he knew a lot of this stuff, I really don't know. And it could have only been from sort of asking quite direct questions or perhaps gossip. You know, you never guess what, Mr. Jones paid £100 for his horse. But there's the price of pigs in there that Mrs. Griffiths bought, and, you know, it's like, wow, okay. But there are amazing snippets of history, and a lot of what we know about Penmaenmawr is because of Ivor Davies collecting stories, researching, and being meticulous about it. And obviously, right through the mid-1900s, writing copious amounts of articles for the newspapers on different parts of Penmaenmawr's history and trying to save it as well. And that he was instrumental in setting up the Historical Society with Dennis at the time in 1973. So his notebook, this one is my favourite because it's got lots of gossip in it, but there are loads. We have a lot of them, and the writing is so small that you have to use a magnifying glass to read it, and it's going to take somebody, a PhD student probably, to come into the museum and have a good look and see what's there. You can see more examples of his. It gets smaller and smaller, his writing, and sort of fainter and fainter. So if any of you want to have a go, want to volunteer to go through that, let me know. Object 24, the Eagle of Eden Hall. So we've recently discovered that the Eagle was not commissioned by the UDC, as I thought, the Town Council. And it was, in fact, part of the original Eden Hall Dempster family garden. They owned Eden Hall in the 1800s. I had done a bit of research on the Dempsters. Not a lot, very surface level, because I was actually researching the stink pipes that are around Dwygyfylchi, and their name came up while I was researching them. I watched a film called The Dig with Ralph Fiennes. I'm sure some of you would have seen it. And right at the end of the film, I saw the credits, and Dempster was in there. And I thought, oh, okay, that's weird, because it's not a very popular name. I'll see whether there's a connection. And lo and behold, there was definitely a connection, because Edith Pretty of Sutton Hoo, so who the film was about, was the granddaughter of Robert Dempster of Eden Hall. And not only that, but Edith Pretty actually lived at Eden Hall for around 6 or 7 years. She actually lived in Eden Hall as all the archaeological stuff was going on in Penmaenmawr. So when the urns were dug up, she was around then. Was she inspired then? We don't know. Did that inspire her love of archaeology or her interest in it? We're not too sure. But it was absolutely an amazing connection. So the eagle was the subject of its own story many years later. It was stolen from Conwy Council stores after it had been smashed off its plinth and gone for renovation. And it was sold to a local antiques dealer. Now, the antiques dealer was in Penmaenmawr, so it was stolen and brought to Penmaenmawr, even though it was from Penmaenmawr. The antiques dealer didn't recognise it, apparently, as the eagle from the garden, and it was sold to somebody who came in and bought it. It was intercepted on its way to the airport in Wisconsin when it appeared in the newspaper the next day as sort of being an item that was stolen from the stores. And then the antiques dealer who sold it contacted the police and said, I've sold it. So they managed to intercept it. After it was returned to the garden, Eden Hall Garden, it was vandalised again, and it was in tiny pieces all over the garden. And Councillor Ken Stevens, I think they were going to sweep everything and put it in the bin at the time. And he said, hold on, let me take all of this. I'm going to see whether I can put it back together. And fair play, he's not a conservator, but wow, he did an amazing job. And so now the eagle looks like this, and it stands on the first floor of the museum on the landing. We're very proud to have it. We have got a little bit more about the story right by the eagle, but also a booklet about this as well, because it is quite an interesting, sort of thorough story. And the last object. Dennis Roberts' hand-drawn maps. So as we know, Dennis has written thousands of papers relaying the history of Penmaenmawr over a 50-year period. He's done an amazing job. He's been in skips. He's been to the quarry offices. He's been to the council offices. You name it, Dennis has collected it. Dennis always tells us that he's finished giving us stuff from his house, and then the next day something else appears. And so we've got a room filling up gradually of all of the things. He was the first person, I think, and you know, I am a historian, and I'm looking back on all the records in Penmaenmawr all the time. I think he was the first person to try and map out the historic landscape around Penmaenmawr, not by singular time period. So he was looking at an area and thinking, okay, well, that's a bit of Bronze Age, that's a bit of Iron Age, that's a bit of medieval, and bringing all of those stories together. When I first got involved in the museum 10 years ago, I found these maps incredibly helpful, because you can tell from my accent probably I'm from South Wales. I moved to North Wales about 25 years ago, but I live an hour away between Betws-y-Coed and Ruthin. This was not my area at all. I knew more about the Conwy Valley and sort of other parts in North Wales. I didn't know about Penmaenmawr, and I just found these incredibly useful as my starting point. And also, they're incredibly beautiful. Dennis is a really good illustrator, and his writing is really clear. His interpretation of the history is really clear. And they really help me consolidate my understanding of the history of Penmaenmawr. And I think that he's done that for hundreds of people over the years, thousands of people over the years. And these maps have been quite the catalyst in that. If there was a chance to produce a little map, then Dennis could do it. And my intention over the next couple of weeks is to publish all of his maps in a book. So we were working on it. We've got a work experience girl who comes in on a Saturday, and we were digging out all the maps the other day and sort of collectively putting them together. And I think there's about 10 or 12 that we can put in a booklet and sort of spread the word really and get other people to share in the joy of the maps as well. So that's it. That's my 25 objects. Thank you. questions?
We'll get back to there.
Okay.
Now.
Sorry, Shirley.
Chairing this.
Sorry, Shirley. It's me told.
People always say to me, Penmaenmawr Museum, what on earth have you got to show there? What's on, you know, to see? And it's such an incredible social and cultural history this area has, hasn't it? And it's just layer upon layer, going through from the Neolithic period to virtually modern day. Okay. Any questions for Suryiah? She's answered. Yes.
The second picture, I think, what you showed, the urn they found in the quarry, the funerary.
Oh yes, yeah.
What are the odds now that, I don't know whether it's been done or not, so I'll ask the question. Is there any way that getting sort of LiDAR stuff up there? Would there be any chance at all of any hidden stuff from LiDAR? Has there been a LiDAR thing?
So there's been an extensive LiDAR survey in the last 2 years that has gone a metre deep. The results of that are being calibrated at the moment. Apparently they found over 360 unrecorded monuments so far. So there's joy, and there's also a bit of, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? There's a portal, a special LiDAR portal that's being developed at the moment, and apparently it's going to launch by the summer. And when that happens, people will be invited, people like yourself will be invited to training courses to learn how to use it, and also demonstrations as part of the Penmaenmawr Roadshow that's going to be happening. So there's loads more to discover on that landscape. And obviously money for archaeology is getting more and more scarce, but I'm looking forward to what the LiDAR is going to sort of highlight.
I had a lot of that aerial pictures many times. The ones about 1923, 24.
Yeah, that's right.
On what the Dave's house there, right, that way.
Yeah.
And you know, the amounts of stone circles, circles, and I was wondering what the odds are of finding any new ones.
Oh, I think, well, 360 was the figure that was given to me the other day. Some of that includes medieval field systems, barrows, etc. But yeah, I think it's going to be a watch this space. There's going to be some exciting stuff, and maybe a lot of frustration as well, because there's not the resources to dig things, but obviously they'll prioritise that over the next couple of years. It's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah, exciting.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
I think Suryiah's going to hate me for this, but going back to the Land Army girls, when I was renovating Craigloyd Farm, there were some signatures there with some little drawings.
Yeah.
Land Army girls with their names and date.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I hacked it off, but the ladies in question, Mrs. Hughes, Trunwilvar, the Craigloyd's wife, Audrey, they came up and they had a photo with it.
Oh, wow.
You can find the photo.
That would be amazing.
Or they managed for it.
Yeah, that would be absolutely amazing.
Yes. And after that, I thought I should have cut it out and I should have,
Yeah, sure.
It's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you've got a photograph, then that, you know.
The three of them came and
yeah, that would be amazing. Be grateful for that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
When answering the gentleman behind you mentioned Penmaenmawr Roadshow, what's that?
So the am I still on? Oh, yeah. The Penmaenmawr Landscape Partnership Project has been going on for the last 7 years. It's in its final year now. They have lots of report findings to present back to the community. So, for example, they've been doing projects on the chuff, on the landscape. They've also done the massive Neolithic axes project, and official reports have been written about all of these things and what has been found out. So I also work for the Penmaenmawr Landscape Partnership, so I'm sort of in my freelance capacity, I'm with them as well. And what we're doing over the course of the rest of this year, starting from May, is setting up a day in each community where the results of things that have happened are presented back to the community. It'll be a drop-in, so people can come along, look at the panels, look at photographs, see what's happened, and also there'll be sort of nearly a year left to contribute to other things that are happening in the project as well. So yeah, that's good. It's a watch this space thing. You'll hear about them shortly as soon as they start to advertise them.
Thank you. Yes.
The axe heads, you talked about a group 6 in the Langdales and a group 7 all over the country, but in the Carneddau. What does the group 6 and the group 7 mean? Is it age?
It's density of stone. So it's the type of stone that the axe head is made from, which relates to the landscape. So here they can tell where the different axes have been fashioned from on this landscape, but they're all called group 7 around Graigloyd. I don't know whether we've got a different group type that is elsewhere on this landscape. I don't think so. But yeah, I believe it's like the density and the type of stone. I'm not an archaeologist, but I'm sure I listen to them and I'm sure that's what it is.
Thanks. Yes.
It's good. Thanks for the talk. It was really interesting. Question about is it Rogart dolls? What period were they up to?
About 1950s to probably 1970s. Somebody might want to correct me there, but yeah, around that period. Some of them, obviously, not the types of things that we would put on sale today. Yeah, but there's narratives to talk about that, you know, and ways to do that. So yeah, and they were dressed in costume from different countries all over the world. So yeah, but their most famous one was a Welsh doll called Gwyneth. And so they used her image on lots of different things. And the image I showed you, there was an egg timer at the bottom. There's a Gwyneth egg timer. My son is 25. He is so jealous of that egg timer. He's asked me to look out for one and buy one for his flat because he absolutely loves the Gwyneth egg timer. So if you've got a spare one, Shirley, then we'll have it.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question for Suryiah? No? Thank you so much.
No problem.
Such an interesting talk about the museum pieces. Can we show our pieces?
Thank you.